Is drinking raw milk safe like RFK Jr. suggests? Can you reduce a glucose spike if you eat your food in, quote unquote, the right order? I'm registered dietitian Abby Sharp. I host a nutrition myth-busting podcast called Bite Back with Abby Sharp. And those are just some of the questions I tackle with qualified experts on my show. There is so much food misinformation and disinformation out there, and it can feel impossible to know what's real and what's BS. On Bite Back, my goal is to help listeners create a pleasurable relationship with food, their body, and themselves, which in my opinion is the fundamental secret to good health. Listen to Bite Back wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes, it is time for our Newsday panel. Jordan Pickett is Vice President at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Welcome back, Jordan. Good to hear from you.
How are you, Rob? Great to be here.
I'm good. Yeah, great to hear from you. Cam Holmstrom is here as well, Principal at Nipaway Strategies. How are you, Cam? Good to hear from you today.
Always good to be back, Rob.
Okay. What does success look like for Prime Minister Carney and the premiers after a meeting like today's First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon? What would you say, Jordan?
Well, yeah. I mean, these premiers tables can always be a challenge for a prime minister. I mean, you always have premiers from all the different provinces, territories, seeking out different agenda issues to kind of, potentially take things over towards their ways. But it seems like there's a lot of goodwill right now at the premiers table. I mean, there is a new prime minister. People are willing to get some deals done. A lot of talk of this interprovincial free trade, but the prime minister is going to have to manage expectations on it. I mean, the campaign, he was very, very clear that this was going to come by Canada Day. Now they're trying to walk back a little bit and seeing what they can get passed through Parliament. But I think in something like this, if they come out singing the same page on marching forward in some of this interprovincial trade, and you don't have others veering off message, I think you can get away with that pretty unscathed.
Okay. What do you think, Cam?
Well, I don't disagree with Jordan's assessment, but I guess what I would add is that I don't think this meeting is going to be successful because of one serious omission, and that's the lack of Indigenous leaders at the table. The fact of the matter is a lot of what's being talked about right now is big national projects, and none of those projects are getting built without rights holders being at the table. And that's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders. And the fact that they were ignored, to me, it's mind-blowing. Frankly, it's stupid. And when I'm seeing what's playing out in Ontario right now, it's playing out in BC right now, with the attempts to basically barrel over Indigenous rights to try to speed things up, it blows my mind, because you actually have Indigenous leaders who are actually saying, look, we understand there are pressures. We need to get things done. Let's get to the table. Let's sort it out. We'll get there, right?
Right.
You actually have people who want to work with you, yet you've actively said, nah, we're not going to have you at the table. So to me, that's a real big opportunity that's been missed.
I wasn't going to jump into this just yet, but let's jump into this because it was on my list, certainly, of things to talk about. So and Cam is Métis. We've talked about this in the past before, so it's good to have you on today to talk about this. If you were to have what I would call First Nations leadership at a meeting like this, who gets a seat at the table, Cam?
You know what? Does it matter who the individual is? Get as many chairs as you need, for crying out loud. Make it work.
Okay.
That's what we elected Carney to do. Carney ran on that, right? This is what we're expecting him to do. And if this moment is as unique and exceptional as it is, which it is, you figure it out. You don't just say, sorry, we're not going to have you there. To me, this is real short-sighted thinking on the part of a little bit too many here. And honestly, I think this is where Mr. Carney's inexperience in the Canadian political environment hurts him, because he's not used to dealing with Indigenous nations. It's not part of what he's done. He's having to learn it fast. And the fact is that, again, you're seeing the Ontario, BC make this mistake, and the feds are starting down this road too with the legislation they're proposing. You have an opportunity to get this right up front, and if you don't, it's going to cause chaos, and you're just going to delay and turn, frankly, people who want to be allies into enemies. How stupid is that? We would say that for any situation.
But I guess one of the complications that I've learned over the course of my career covering those issues is not all First Nations agree on all things. There will be First Nations that want to have participation, even equity ownership in natural resources projects, and other First Nations that are totally opposed to any development in their traditional lands. Cam, it's very complicated. right?
Yes, it is. And that's why you have to have these national leaders at the table to speak to that, who can help them guide through that. Again, in working, finding ways forward, finding ways to yes. And that's what I'm saying about the situation. Even in Ontario right now, where they're having mass protests today against the Ford government, all the major First Nations leaders in Ontario are saying, look, we're not saying no. We're saying we don't trust you. We need to put this down on paper. Like, really, is that such a crazy message to say? Like, okay, look, we agree, but we want it down on paper. Like, no one else would expect anything less, right?
Okay. Was this so? Cam, short-sighted, shows a lack of experience, or maybe deft on the new prime minister's part by not having First Nations voices at the table at a big meeting like this. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a huge file that has to be managed. I mean, I appreciate Cam's expertise and lived experience in this area and listening to some of that. But I think this is something that every prime minister starts to recognize at some point. And to your point, Rob, you're right as well, is that there's not unanimity across the country amongst Indigenous peoples, and it's sometimes not even in the same nation. I mean, I remember there was a previous issue in BC. You had the elected chiefs were very supportive of a certain project, and then you had some of the hereditary chiefs said no.
I think that was Coastal GasLink. Yeah, Coastal GasLink.
Right. So it's very difficult in this country to get certain projects built, and I think those are some of the things that the Prime Minister is going to start to realize. He set the bar for himself very, very high, and now it is up to him to meet the moment and show Canadians how he can manage through these files. And part of that is going out and sitting down and championing these projects, sometimes that the previous Prime Minister wasn't willing to do. So if he's willing to create cross-national allies, reach out to Conservatives who also know some of these projects as well, and get as many voices around the table as possible.
Rob, can I throw one thing out there?
Yeah,
I'll just point
sure.
out. Okay. Last time I checked, Doug Ford didn't win 100% of the vote when he got elected. Danielle Smith doesn't even have 100% of the vote. There's no unanimity in any province yet. We don't say, look, Ontario, hey, you guys are disagreeing. We can't have you at the table. Like, seriously. That is how we approach these things with Indigenous people.
Okay.
Somehow we have to be 100%, 110% on side all the time, or we don't get spoken to. Yet you could be a province like, hey, you know what? Hey, disagreement all you want.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Valid point. But I am curious, just given what we're hearing, even what happened in the Ontario legislature today. We'll have some audio of that. What could the next few months hold? Are we going back to a tumultuous time? I don't know more. Shut down Canada, that kind of situation. Highways blockaded, railways blockaded, ports blockaded because of a lack of consultation. We'll talk about that when we come back. So we're back. It's our Newsday panel. I'm here with Jordan Baguettes, Vice President of Blue Sky Strategy Group, and Cam Holmstrom is principal at Nipaway Strategies. Just building on the conversation, guys, that we were having in the first segment, and what the months, maybe even weeks ahead, could hold for the country. Let's take, for example, in Ontario. Cam mentioned Ontario. So the Ford government has what's known as Bill 5, which is kind of its own, we want to fast track what we view as big, important projects. And part of Bill 5 would create what the government calls special economic zones. And one of the special economic zones would be in northern Ontario, where there's the Ring of Fire, which is 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay. And once again, you have Indigenous and First Nations leadership saying, whoa, not so fast. What about us? And the Ford government has said it's going to fast track this legislation because there aren't many weeks left in the session for the Ontario legislature. The Ford government has a huge majority, and it's going to, well, I guess if you were an opposition politician, you would say they're going to ram it through before that government breaks for the summer in Ontario. So today in the legislature, Saul Mamakwa, who is a First Nations member of the provincial legislature, he rose to talk to this Bill 5 and talk about how he views it as a betrayal of First Nations treaty rights and whatnot. And they kicked him out of the legislature. It caused quite a caused quite a stir. So let's listen to a little. This is what happened today in Ontario.
Speaker, we know the Premier is telling untruths to First Nations about...
I will ask the member to withdraw.
He's not telling the truth.
But that's the truth.
I will ask the member to withdraw.
That is the truth. Going.
I will ask the member to withdraw.
Speaker, Premier is telling untruths. That's the truth.
I will warn the member. Please withdraw.
Our rights are not being respected.
Draw the comment.
Going. Speak.
Sam Momakwa, you have been named.
So being named is basically we're calling you out and we're going to kick you out of the legislature. And then he went outside the legislature and continued to talk to news reporters. And there have been other First Nations leaders at the Ontario legislature, and they have been saying things like, get ready for Idle No More 2.0. People may remember Idle No More back in 2012. And then we had hashtag Shutdown Canada back 2020, 2021. The only thing that put an end to Shutdown Canada was the pandemic, when the pandemic came along and actually shut down Canada. But all kinds of protests, highways blocked, railways blocked, all of that. Do you see us on the same kind of track, Cam? Is that where we're headed here in the next little while?
I don't know if this is exactly where we're heading, because I would draw a distinction between Idle No More and the other that you mentioned, because the other was not centrally organized and was really much more further people on the fringes. But I see it more as an Idle No More just because of, again, the context and the reasonableness of the moment. Let me remind everyone what the Ontario First Nations leaders, from the Chiefs of Ontario down to the different treaty organizations, what they're saying. They're saying that, look, we agree there should be legislation on this. We agree that we want to help you to do that legislation, and we agree we want to do it fast. All we're asking you to do is withdraw this, write it with new stuff with us, come back in a couple months. They're not saying no. They're not saying never. They're not refusing to do anything. All they're reasonably asking is, look, let's get this right. And the response to that has been, as you kind of put it, Rob, to ram it through. And what's that going to result in? Yeah, you're going to end up with this in the courts. It'll be tied up for years, and you're going to end up with protests. And are things going to go anywhere? Like, this is a choice this government's making. And to me, it's mind-blowing, because you have this rare opportunity where there actually is some unanimity on actually getting some of these things done. First Nations leaders are saying, look, we agree. There has to be a way of doing this, right? And they're willing to sit down and figure it out, even if it takes you a couple extra months to do it. So to me, it's like honestly, Doug Ford's looking at gift horse in the mouth and deciding to kick it in the nards instead. It's like, okay. I really don't get it. And of course, people are going to be upset when that's the reaction.
And that's trial by fire for a new prime minister. If he's just months into the job and he has blockades to deal with from coast to coast, Jordan, right? This could be this is a problem that could be on the horizon for Mr. Carney. He must be aware of this.
Well, I think so, and I mean he's already starting to get a crash course in governing Canada, and I think he's realizing that it's great. He was the man with the plan to come into it and was able to bring unity to the country and everything. But he's going to find out very quickly, I think, as he's finding out that it is a very difficult country to govern. But this is the job he signed up for. At the end of the day, this is what he wanted to do. This is what he came back into public life to do. And so yeah, he's got to bring people onto his team that clearly understand these issues, that can help manage through them, and continue to have these conversations, at the Premier's table and with First Nations leadership as well. So yeah, no, it's certainly going to be a challenging time for him. I think he's going to see that he can't just go and sit in his cabinet room and sign fake executive orders and expect that's going to work. It's
and bring everybody together, smiling faces in Saskatoon. It's what happens after that.
Exactly, right? and that's what every prime minister discovers, is that how do you actually get these projects moving.
Okay. When we come back, we'll talk about Pierre Poilievre and when he might face a leadership review, and what that review could look like, and how he'll come out the other side of that. Here with Cam Holmstrom from Nivoe Strategies and Jordan Piquette, Vice President, Blue Sky Strategy Group. There's a report over the weekend that Pierre Poilievre could face a leadership review next March. Now, I don't know how that differs from previous reports on timing of a potential leadership review. I guess the big question is, how at risk is Pierre Poilievre's leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada after losing the election and losing in his own riding of Carleton? What would you say, Jordan?
I think he's quite united. I mean, he's firmly in control of the party right now. The question surrounding the leadership review, let's remember, is just surrounding when the convention's going to be. So I think originally it's scheduled for the spring. There had been talk about moving it up earlier. But that's just something that every Conservative leader faces at a convention if they don't win a majority government. So it's nothing new there. That's just something he has to go through. But basically all of caucus, from what I can understand, is pretty squarely united behind him. Sure, it's a little awkward right now not having a seat in the Commons, but that's going to be fixed up quite soon. Had a willing MP to step aside, and come September 15th, when Parliament comes back after the summer break, Poilievre will be right back in his seat as leader of the official opposition and taking on Carney day to day. And I think we won't have missed much time between then and now.
Okay. Is that how you see things? I mean, Jordan outlines a scenario that's kind of smooth sailing for Pierre Poilievre right now. A united team behind him. The situation over the summer. Well, the summer session's going to be over in 20 days from now, and he'll be back in the fall after winning a by-election, and all's well in Poilievre land. What do you think, Cam?
I think there's a big difference between everyone being behind someone and people being quiet. From what I know of this caucus, this isn't a caucus that deals well with any internal dissent. So I think people are biding their time, if anything, at this point. But I would point this out, is that when you look at what happened with Mr. Scheer and how he lost an election, then was removed not too shortly after, then how Mr. O'Toole lost and then was removed and not too shortly after, a few months after, 9 months is an eternity in Canadian politics. And I think you can count as at least 3 or 4 eternities in Conservative leadership politics. So, okay. Yeah, you know what? There may not be anything on the horizon right now, but that's a long way to go for a lot of people to figure something out different or to organize. Just saying.
So you're saying, let's check back in March and see what the political landscape is looking like then, Cam? Is that what you're saying?
Even check back in January, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if I have 2 seconds here, there is a very big difference between Andrew Scheer's time and Aaron O'Toole's time. Andrew Scheer, I think, wanted to keep the job. Didn't necessarily. I think he went out there on an apology tour for a bit too long about the campaign. Aaron O'Toole tried to quash dissent in caucus, realized he did not have the support inside of it, and that backfired on him. I think Pierre has learned from both of those, and I think it's pretty smooth sailing from here. Not to say it's not a long time in politics. Absolutely it is. Anything can come up. Anything can come up with Mark Carney too. But it's the reality situation he's in right now.
Well, Jordan, I'll just say, from what I hear, it's really early to learn a lesson from the other two when you're the one who helped push them out the door. Just saying.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no one standing there to push anyone out right now. Is the difference, I guess.
Okay, all right. Nobody that's willing to stand in front of a television camera anyway. Good to hear from both of you today. Thank you so much. Really interesting conversation to start the week. Jordan Paquette from Blue Sky Strategy Group, from Neepaway Strategies, Cam Holmstrom. I'm Rob Snow. Talkback is coming up next after the latest breaking news on News Radio. Welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. Today's topic, Canada's fight against climate change. Canada's fight against climate change. Here's a question for you to get things going today. How important is it for you that Canada continues to be a world leader in the fight against climate change? How important is it for you Canada continues to be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Would you say it's very important to you, somewhat important, not important at all? What would you say? The fight against climate change, where does this rank for you? Say on a list of priorities, on a list of things that you think the government should be taking seriously. The fight against climate change. We wanted to explore this topic again with you today because of this First Minister's meeting that is happening right now in Saskatoon. The Prime Minister is there, some cabinet ministers are there, all the premiers are there, and all of their people are there. Lots of people there. And they're talking about fast-tracking so-called nation-building projects that are in the national interest. And pipelines are sure to come up. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was talking about pipelines today and how that is a priority for her government in Alberta. Another pipeline to the west, a pipeline to the north. It would be great to have a pipeline into Atlantic Canada, getting more of Canada's oil and gas from the west to other markets. In Ontario, there is a desire and even a big push on to open new mining projects in northern Ontario, in what's known as the Ring of Fire. And in fact, Ontario Premier Doug Ford is going to fast track a bill from his government through the Ontario legislature called Bill 5 that would declare this zone a special economic zone, want to build a road there, fast track mining projects. Not everybody is happy about that, including environmentalists and including First Nations leaders. In Nova Scotia, you have Premier Tim Houston, who has wanted to unlock that province's natural resources sector, whether that's things like uranium mining or more exploration, maybe even more drilling eventually for offshore oil and offshore gas. And yet it's hard to escape the backdrop for all of this, the fight against climate change. We're already seeing all kinds of news. The wildfires in the West, thousands of people being told to leave their homes because of wildfires in northern Manitoba and northern Saskatchewan, northern BC, both of those provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they're under provincial states of emergency right now. And soon enough, the news will be filled with stories about heat waves and drought conditions and smoky skies. There was a news story in recent days about how Canada's glaciers are, quote, doomed to disappear because of climate change. The situation in Saskatchewan with wildfires already being called the worst wildfire season in decades, if not ever. Another news report says it's a classic sign of climate change. And we all know that the previous Liberal government led by Justin Trudeau had many policies that were passed all in the name of fighting climate change. You had the oil and gas emissions cap. This government is being encouraged to abandon that. You had the so-called No Pipelines Bill, C-69. This government being encouraged to abandon that as well. C-48. The so-called West Coast tanker ban. This government is being lobbied right now to end that. Clean fuel regulations. They don't want that in Alberta. Zero emissions vehicle sales mandate. Get rid of that, some say. Trudeau government had a plan, said it was going to plant 2 billion trees. It's not anywhere close to that, but that was part of the plan as well. It created funds, the Canada Growth Fund, Strategic Innovation Fund. All it said was to aid in the development of low carbon technologies for the economy of the future. It offered people grants if they installed things like heat pumps, made energy efficient retrofits to their homes. And of course, there were carbon taxes. There was the consumer carbon tax, and there still is the carbon tax on industrial emitters. The consumer carbon tax is all but gone. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens to the carbon taxing system for industrial emitters, the government being encouraged to drop that. The last government also made all kinds of commitments and set all kinds of targets to lower greenhouse gas emissions. It promised that as part of its commitment to the Paris Climate Accord, Canada would reduce its output of greenhouse gas emissions by between 40 to 45% by the year 2030, using 2005 as a baseline. And it also promised Canada would be net zero on greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. And even some of these targets were seen by some environmentalists as not going far enough. And Canada was often accused of being a laggard in the fight against climate change because it did do things like fund the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline project, and it allowed emissions increases from the oil sands in Alberta. There are some Canadians who are worried that the push for so-called nation-building projects, whatever form they might take, might mean that Canada is slipping in its commitment to fighting climate change. It's being pushed or taking a back seat, becoming less of a priority, the fight against climate change, this new government. Our question is, what if it is? Building new pipelines, opening new ports, opening new mines, expanding the offshore oil industry in Atlantic Canada. What if all of that takes priority over the fight against climate change? What would you think of that? Is it something that would worry you, trouble you, concern you at all? Or would you say that's actually a positive development? Because sometimes Canada's fight against climate change has come at the expense of growing the economy and creating good jobs, and even keeping the country together. There's a case that could be made. This is about national unity as well. Please weigh in on the discussion today. Join our conversation. Our call-in line is 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. If you've never called before, just mention that to our call screener. We will make your call a priority and have your say on Canada's fight against climate change. How important is that for you? It's Talkback. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
With so much discussion about fast-tracking nation-building projects, we're asking on Talkback today, how important is it for you that Canada continues to be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Would you say it's very important, somewhat important, not important at all? 1-833-668-2577. It's our Monday Talkback. Fred is up first on the line from Calgary. Hello, Fred.
How are you today?
I'm good, Fred. Yeah, good to hear from you today. What would you say? What's your opinion on the fight against climate change? How important is that for you?
I think it's very important, and I don't think we're going to accomplish much. It's one of them things where we got big countries like China, Pakistan, India that are absolutely doing nothing, and I think it's great that we do stuff, but I don't think we're making a big difference. You mentioned forest fires. I remember many fires. They started and we got them out. Today they just seem to go on and on and on and on, and we can't get them out. And there's a reason for that. It's either the climate's too hot, or people are getting really stupid and they keep throwing cigarettes out that are lit, or they are lighting fires for personal gain.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff that we could do.
Right.
And it's going to cost money. And it goes back to what you were talking about. You got about 3 topics going. One of them was major projects. I come from a little place called the Miramichi up in New Brunswick. There's a bridge there that was built in 1967. It's a beautiful bridge. It crosses over the Miramichi River from Chatham to Douglastown. That bridge right now needs repairs. They want to remove the sidewalk to save $50 million. Not only do we need major projects, and that's Susan Holt, by the way, that wants to save the $50 million. Take out the sidewalk, save $50 million. She wants to talk about
must
major
be a heck of
projects,
a sidewalk. Yeah.
and she can't even look after the little ones.
Right.
We got a big problem.
Okay. But, I chose the backdrop of, we want to build, pipelines and mines and all this thing. Some people are worried, what if we backslide in the fight against climate change in order to fast track all of these projects?
Backslide. There's no such thing. All they got to do is use common sense. They got safety. They got protocols in place for the environment. You know, we need major projects. The Trans Mountain Pipeline I worked on for 3 years. The little guy did good along the pipeline. The little guy did good. The big guy did good. Everybody did good. They put $42 billion in the economy. It came out of the taxes, but it went back in again. We need projects like that, but done like a lot tighter, not loose money.
Fair enough, Fred. You've got us off to a good start, sir. You've got us off to a good start. Thank you. Thank you. To Evan up next. Hi, Evan. You're on the air. What's your opinion, please?
I think it's important, but it's just being realistic about it. You made a lot of good points, and it's just like the previous caller said, you know, there's a lot of other countries that have a bigger carbon footprint than us. So I wish people would really just look at the facts. I'm an electrician myself. I'm from Nova Scotia. I just moved up here. And I mean, you know, West gets a lot of hate, but you guys, I've seen a lot of solar farms out here, stuff I haven't seen back home at all. You guys are doing really well, but it's just, you know, their methods for what they consider helping reduce a carbon footprint doesn't really add up in a sense.
As I said, you know, the government's under a lot of pressure.
And regardless, like you have, I install solar and stuff, and yeah, it's just residentially fine. But if you look at the transmission of electricity and how it's ran for most businesses and large scale stuff, like alternators and generators aren't going anywhere forever. That's how a majority of electricity is generated now.
But as I said, you know, the government is under, for example, Mark Carney met with a bunch of oil and gas executives yesterday, and they were surely telling him, well, the oil and gas emissions cap has got to go. That no pipelines bill has got to go. That tanker ban on the West Coast has got to go. Environmentalists are going to say, well, those are important measures that were done in the name of fighting climate change. So this is where the balancing act comes in.
Again, like take Nova Scotia for instance, it's just an unrealistic expectation. Like we had the same provincial guideline we're trying to follow for electric vehicles and stuff like that. And I'm from the city center, HRM, and within the HRM, we only have one supercharging station. Literally just one supercharging, and they have a plan to install more, but it's like the infrastructure is not even there. I'm not too sure about Alberta and Calgary yet, but the infrastructure isn't there for these renewable things. We tried putting in like tidal power down in the Bay of Fundy. It's just too volatile. The ocean's too much. You can't do it. Same with wind, a lot of mechanical issues, but it's
well, as somebody from Nova Scotia, how do you feel about more? You know, if Nova Scotia companies were involved more in the offshore oil business,
how would you feel about that? And I'll just put it like this in a quick sense. It's our power grid in Nova Scotia. There's like 5 across North America, but mainly our small power grid in Nova Scotia is so strained. I worked for a contractor down there, and essentially what they're doing is, I'm not sure if you heard the mess about Nova Scotia Power, but their power grid is so strained that they had this contract. They're trying to upgrade and put more energy efficient devices in people's homes because they have no plans to upgrade that grid. Their grid is so massively strained. And it's like we don't even have the infrastructure or these things in place to actually make their plan work. It's like, yes, people want to fight climate change. Yes, people want to leave less of a carbon footprint, but just look at where your electricity actually comes from, how it's transmitted to homes and businesses. Look how you can't just put that much more strain on the grid by everybody getting an EV charger, installing all these superchargers. It's unrealistic.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for calling. Interesting points all around. The fight against climate change. How important is that for you that Canada remains a leader in the fight against climate change? Share your opinion on that, please, at 1-833-668-2577 on Talkback on News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
We are asking, how important is it for you Canada continues to be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Very important, somewhat important, not important at all. With all of this talk about fast-tracking nation-building projects, new pipelines, new mines, new roads, expansion maybe of the offshore oil and gas sector in Atlantic Canada. Jared up next in Calgary. You're on the air, Jared. What's your opinion?
Yeah, hi, Rob.
Hi, Jared.
I would say in short answer to your question, somewhat important.
And why do you say that?
I'm going to call it that because I do think it's important to be responsible in our development of resources and industry. But as far as, you know, your previous callers were talking about other countries and their concern for climate change, and maybe close to zero, maybe not as important as we have it. But the question that I would put back is, do we really feel like it's our responsibility to make up for other countries and their lack of desire to have that responsibility for climate change, and by making up for it, taxing our citizens into submission and capping our industry, which typically, I think, as far as our industry goes, is fairly responsible about it, or at least we can move towards being more responsible about it. But do we have to go above and beyond in order to make up for the United States or China or India or these other countries that don't feel as important as we do?
Okay. But do you feel as though maybe it's not being taken as seriously as it maybe once was, just given the renewed or the new state of the world with Trump and tariffs and the need to, you know, we hear this, we want to Trump-proof our economy, we want to make Canada more resilient to all of these things. So they want to expedite some of these projects, and maybe that might come at the expense of the environment.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think our pendulum has swung so far to that extreme that do we really think that coming back a little bit is going to be the end of the world? I mean, as long as we're going forward with some sort of responsibility. I mean, your intro talked about the wildfires, and you know, here in Alberta we've got hailstorms, and I remember growing up with BC wildfires and the hailstorms in Alberta and everything.
But you would say things got so out of balance that if it's shifting back a little bit, it may be coming back into a more balanced state. Yeah.
Yeah, where it can be more sustainable for
more sustainable. Okay, good stuff. Gotcha. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, good call. The latest breaking news is coming up next. This is Talkback. We're talking about climate change today. This is News Radio. With so much discussion about fast-tracking nation-building projects, we are asking on Talkback today how important it is for you that Canada continues to lead the world in the fight against climate change. Very important, somewhat important, not important at all. Have your say on Talkback today. 1-833-668-2577. There is one line available there. It's yours if you want it. Alan has grabbed a line, and he's up next. Hi, Alan.
Hey, hello. Glad to talk to you. I would like to say that I care about climate, and I also care about the economic welfare of Canada. A lot of people seem to think these are mutually exclusive, but there are a number of opportunities where we can have both. I think about exporting natural gas, whether it's LNG, or really convenient as ammonia, which is really a carrier agent for hydrogen. When we can send hydrogen to the Far East, we're Trump-proofing our economy. But the neat thing about that is over 90% of the CO2 in the production of that can be sequestered. So we have countries like Japan and Korea and Malaysia who are mandating their power producers to replace coal, part of their coal, with ammonia. If we could even pick up 10 million tons of this, not only are we Trump-proofing our economy, but we are bringing about $25 billion worth of taxes to Canada, the three levels of government, federal, provincial, and local. And yet the feds have been wavering on this for over 2 years. We have a chance to have our cake and eat it too here, Rob. But there just hasn't seemed to be a will yet. They're talking, more LNG, hydrogen via ammonia. Well, we could have shovels in the ground in less than 2 years.
Wow. Sir, I have to plead ignorance. I don't know much about ammonia production in Canada, where it's done, that kind of thing. What part of the country would be known for that?
It would be done right in Alberta, where the natural gas is.
Okay.
They'd be railed out to Prince Rupert and put on, 125,000-ton tankers, hey?
Okay.
So,
okay.
We've got the cheap feedstock. And by the way, we already produce more than 2 million tons of ammonia a year and ship it by rail. So there is an opportunity here, Rob, that politicians just haven't seemed to pick up on yet, hey?
Okay. So if it's Prince Rupert, then you're talking about having to probably lift that tanker ban then?
No. Tankers are allowed in. It's not petroleum, hey? It's it's ammonia, hey? Which no tanker ban needs to be lifted there.
Okay. Good to know. All right, sir.
And we already have rail tracks out there and a terminal out there. Huh?
Oh, really? Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
It's just an opportunity. They
sounds like
bogged down someplace in energy and trade right now.
Yes, that is really interesting. I was not aware of that, the economic opportunities there. Thank you, Alan. Very informative call, sir. Yeah, good to hear from you today. Brantford, Ontario. Chris is up next. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Hi, Chris. What would you say?
I'm not
What's
sure
your opinion?
My call will be as educated as the one before me, but I think our politicians are failing to put this thing in perspective. When you consider that India and China, between them, probably have, I don't know, maybe 3 billion people, I think what we sometimes forget is we're a small country with 40 million people. And if our contribution to the problem is as little as 2%, as I've been told, our emissions are something like 2% of the world problem, I think, we're whistling past the graveyard. If those big countries don't change their ways, what we do here doesn't really, I don't feel, change anything. So I think what we've got to do, this threat that the U.S. is imposing on us today means that we've got to rethink the whole way this country operates. And I think, it's fine to not give heavy weight to the economy, but let's face it, we all depend on our food and our lodging and our everything. The economy's got to be, and particularly when we can't really influence the problem that much, my opinion is the country needs to change direction.
Needs to change direction. Okay. But on being a leader, because the government would say, well, we have to show the way. We have to set an example. And why would those other countries, you named India, China, for example, why would they do it if we're not willing to do it? That everybody has to do it, and we have to do our part.
I don't know who got the idea that a small country like Canada has to be leading the way when we all know that where the real power lies in the world. All the major powers in the world, they pay lip service perhaps to what Canada thinks, but we're a drop in the bucket. This is a wonderful country. I love it, but
sure.
I think we're just not facing the reality of what's the world situation.
I've put that to people who are in the environmental movement. I say, look, we're 1.5%, by the government's own estimate, 1.5% of global emissions is Canada.
That's right.
Comes from Canada. What they will usually come back to me is, well, look at per capita emissions, because we're way up. They were probably the second highest in the world when it comes to the emissions per capita. And that's mainly because of our oil and gas sector.
Absolutely. And I don't know what the future holds as far as the oil and gas sector, but I think that when we're less than, as you just said, less than 2%, I think we're putting ourselves through a hell of a lot of grief, through a lot of grief. We really don't need to, if you really look at the situation right and square in the eye.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for your call today on Talkback, and you can have your say if you pick up the phone and give us a call today on the Monday Talkback, 1-833-668-2577. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
So much talk about fast-tracking nation-building projects in the national interest, whether that's pipelines or enlarging ports, more port access, exploiting offshore oil and gas opportunities, opening new mines, building roads to the Ring of Fire. We do want to get your opinion. How important is fighting climate change for you right now? Where does that rank for you? Is it important for you that we still fight climate change? Somewhat important, not important at all? 1-833-668-2577. Sarah is in Halifax today. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah. What would you say?
Hi. Climate change to me is very important, actually. And I hear a lot of people call in saying China's a problem, India's a problem. What's our part? We're too small. But China right now is actually leading the world right now in renewable energy, and it's set to be the world leader with climate change. So that's really not an excuse. And I think it's important for us to think about the climate as we do these different projects because they affect humans as well, like our water, our clean water. These are important things. Like here in Nova Scotia, they are planning to do a bunch of resource extraction, and I have no problem with that, building the economy, but there's zero transparency. Like the government, like people are asking questions, they want to be a part of the talks, but the government has been very quiet. And I think we need more transparency when it comes to some of these projects so that we, the people, know what's going on as well. And it's not just these deals going on behind closed doors.
Right.
But yeah, that would be my
So
take
for
on
example,
that.
in your province right now, there's a moratorium on fracking, right?
Yeah.
For natural gas, fracking for oil, whatever. And the premier there, Tim Houston, he's talked about, well, maybe we should end that moratorium, that we ban too many things in Nova Scotia. And in the interest of promoting natural resources development, we should maybe open up Nova Scotia to fracking. What would you think if something like that happened?
I don't think I would agree, although I'd have to see more information. But Nova Scotia, like we're different from other provinces such as Alberta. We're highly linked. Our freshwater resources are highly linked. So contaminating a small water body somewhere could actually contaminate like a third of the province, for instance. So there's different risks here than there are in other provinces, and I think that needs to be taken into account. I agree, though, as Nova Scotians, we need to do something with our economy, but I think we need to be cautious and careful that we don't hurt our citizens as it's been done in the past.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Sarah. Yep, good. Staying in Nova Scotia, Porters Lake, Nova Scotia is our next call. Jim. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Rob. Great
Hi,
call.
Jim.
Great topic today.
Okay, thank you. What's your opinion on it?
I think, absolutely we need to do something about climate change. I've got 4 grandchildren, and I think about it a lot, about what they're going to inherit in terms of, this fluid atmosphere that surrounds us and things like that. But I had a great professor one time, and he said, nothing is inevitable if we plan for it as human beings and deal with it. So with that in mind, I do think that there's lots of social engineering, lots of physical engineering that we can do to be able to, let's say, do both at the same time. And, some of your callers have talked about some of these potential solutions and so on. But one of the things that I haven't heard is the fact that, we know there's a bunch of countries that aren't doing as much or aren't doing anything, but there are also countries that are doing a lot more. And these are mostly European countries whom now we want to trade with. So we've got 600 million people in the European Union that may say, if you don't do this, we're not buying your goods. And right now, Nova Scotia lobster is locked out of the Chinese market because of influence from the U.S. over the electrical car issue, right? So, we've got lobster fishermen in Nova Scotia that are getting up at 2 a.m, going out fishing lobster, making $1 a pound on it. So on an 8-hour day, that's not very much money. And the long and short of it is because the Chinese have backed out of this market. So they've dictated our market, what we can do is, so this is going to have huge
right.
ramifications.
And that was retaliation because we put 100% tariffs on those made in China EVs. So they slapped a tariff on our lobster, right? And other seafood.
And the Western Canadian grain, too.
And Western Canadian grains, you're right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there we are. So it's not really a simple thing. They're not doing anything, so we shouldn't do anything. In this interlocked situation that we are right now, in terms of trying to manipulate our own destiny and perhaps separate a bit the trade from the U.S., it's not going to be really easy to tell people that, and because they just may not buy our goods. So and if we act as a country, each province has a bit of a say in that. It's not Alberta's say necessarily, right? It's not Saskatchewan's say. It's not Nova Scotia's say. But what we really need to do is, for example, the number one cause of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada is space heating. We live in a cold climate. Nova Scotia is the warmest province in Canada, but I'm going to tell you, we had a cold winter. But it wasn't minus 40 like it is in Flin Flon, or minus 40 like it is in Moncton, right? So we can do a lot, and I don't mean heat pumps and things like that. We can do a lot with building stock, new buildings, other things. And that's what we can learn from other countries, and also teach other countries how to do this properly. So my response is we have to do both, and it's not inevitable. We just got to knuckle down and get it done.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
I am pro-fracking. Go ahead.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pro-fracking. I mean, the fracking has a real bad rap in the United States because it was done by a bunch of cowboys that were non-regulated. In Western Canada, it's a totally different situation. And there was a fantastic report written about that, the Wheeler Report, which was written, I think, around 2012, that recommended moving forward with a made in Nova Scotia solution for fracking.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Yes, that should be moved forward. I'm not in favor of the uranium mining, mainly because we've got too many hurricanes. We have way too many hurricanes here that they can't design the tailings ponds for. They're just not. The engineers just do not have the tools to design the tailings ponds.
A little bit in the weeds there, so I'm going to have to wrap it up because we're a bit tight on time. But I really appreciate your call. You make lots of really interesting points, and I hope you'll call back sometime. It's Talk Back. I'm Rob Snow. We're talking about climate change.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
How important is it that Canada continues to be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Very important, somewhat important, not important at all. 1-833-668-2577. George is up next. George calling from Calgary. Hello, George.
Hello.
Hi, George. What would you say? What's your opinion?
I think it's. I'm going to be biased. Transparency here. I do research, so it's very important because I do. I'm doing my research. I'm doing short-term prediction models on short-term climate shocks and environmental events or extreme environmental events that are affecting Canada. Right. So there has to be. I mean, I understand the whole aspect that we have to support our economy as well, right? But there's so many other areas of topics we could go on this, but I will give some ideas on the costs here, just roughly. We're probably by the end of this decade, our GDP, and this is from the Canada Climate Institute project. At this, we're probably going to be looking at having a cut of about $35 billion in our GDP, which is not a small number. And unfortunately, who pays for that is, of course, the taxpayers. And what's a little bit more concerning is, of course, IBC. The Institute of
the Insurance Bureau of Canada?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, so they're estimating every year their costs are going to be $3 billion plus. So there is a concern, and I do have a tough time when people start trying to point at countries because and you mentioned about the per capita piece here. It's a consumption. Like we will point at China. Well, we get all our goods from China. It's like people say, well, where would we be without oil? Well, it's almost the same thing with China now. All our goods are basically there. And the problem is they are charged for the climate or CO2 production, but we get the goods, right? So that's there's a sway there. And
so if I could just interrupt, this $35 billion figure that you cite, is that that's the economic cost of climate change?
Yeah, that's going to be the climate impact. That's the climate change.
Climate impact. Okay.
That's the climate impact. So it's the climate disaster, just the climate disasters. I'm not even talking about
right.
The pollution and health concerns and all what we pay in our health as well, right? I'm just talking about climate disasters. So there's other impacts that I'm not even touching on.
Right. Okay.
And then the last piece, if I may touch on, Canada. Everybody sort of talks about, again, we're so low, we're 1.5%. But you really look at that, we're roughly 10th in the world, both historically and this is just on CO2. I'm not jumping on the greenhouse gases. And we're roughly about 11 or 12 in that. So that means there's 180 countries that look towards us. So we're not, and if they say...
So if we're not leading, we're not setting a good example. Very interesting. I really thank you for your call today as well, and all your calls in hour number 1.
2577.
We're talking about climate change, the backdrop being all of this discussion. First Minister's meeting today, as a matter of fact, about nation-building projects. So we are asking, how important is it for you, Canada, be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Would you say it's very important, somewhat important, not important at all? Our call-in line, 1-833-668-2577. We're just wondering, with all of this talk about fast-tracking nation-building projects, for example, one project, one review, getting projects done in 6 months, 2 years, approved, application to approval, 6 months to 2 years. There are concerns we're backsliding on climate change. Where does this rank for you? What's more important? Let's go to Rick in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Hello, Rick. You're up next.
Hey, good afternoon, Rob. Look,
hi, Rick.
If you could have a negative number for how important climate change is for me, you could apply that. 0 would be the best I can do right now. And I'll tell you why. I started studying the climate back in the 70s when the climate experts were predicting a mini ice age. And I took it kind of seriously, and my wife and I, we invested in a thermal solar system that's still operational on our house. And over the years, we've changed it into a thing that just did hot water to a thing that now does space heating. And because of that, our house now, 150 years old, we spend we use about 500 to 700 liters of oil per year, whereas when we moved in, the previous owners were using 5,000 liters of oil. So that's number one. Number two is, excuse my sarcasm here, but I'd rather we don't do any fracking or resource development here in Nova Scotia so we can suck all the money we want out of Alberta. And, of course, I'm being sarcastic there. It's just absolutely ridiculous that we do that, ban everything that could make money for us and instead take handouts from Alberta and make them do it all. It's a ridiculous thing. Climate change, as far as I'm concerned, is a geopolitical hoax. There's no other way around it, in my view. If you listen to mainstream media for the last 20 years, you wouldn't believe that. But I was there at the beginning. I saw what the United Nations did. I know they fudged the numbers. I know all that stuff. So anyway, I don't want to go on about that, but climate change is a ridiculous
But in your
thing,
province, you have a premier who said we have to stop banning everything. There's a moratorium on fracking. He's open to more offshore oil exploration and drilling. He's willing to consider new mining project, uranium mining. And there's already people who are lined up in opposition to this, of course. But you would be all for it.
Those are the... Yeah. I don't want to use any derogatory term. Those are the people who are opposed to it and believe firmly that climate change is a thing and that we can do something about it. But in fact, if Nova Scotia disappeared off the map and never made another ounce or ton of carbon dioxide, which is the life breath of the planet, by the way, if we never made any more carbon dioxide, the total global reduction would amount to 4/100ths of 1%. So, go for it, Nova Scotia.
Okay. Gotcha. Rick, thank you. Yep. Not important at all, he says. What do you say? 1-833-668-2577. Very busy in the first hour, but we have 3 lines available. We would love to fit you in as we kick this around for a couple of hours here on Talkback to start the week. Cambridge, Ontario. Dallas is up next. Hi, Dallas.
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
Yes, yeah, I'm good, Dallas. Thanks for calling. What would you say?
Well, I do agree somewhat, but we don't have to be a leader. What we need to do is take care of our own industry. Stop trying to dictate to the world what they should do in order to do this, because clearly they're not going to listen anyways. Not because we're just Canada. Don't get me wrong on that point, but they're going to do what they want to do. I think as far as eliminating the industrial carbon tax,
yes,
wouldn't be a terrible thing. But it needs to be, if and when he does it, it needs to be done with the idea that, okay, you're not paying us this tax now, but you're going to reinvest at least a good chunk of that money into whatever it is goes out your stack and clean it up.
Okay.
And I'll say that as a very quick example, because I come from a town which was 60 miles away from Murdochville, Quebec, and there was a copper mine there that ran from, I think it was officially opened in 1956. And in 76 or so, they had scientists and all these people come in because the town was literally brown from the emissions coming out of the stacks of smelting the copper and such.
Sure.
And they installed scrubbers on those stacks, and it pulled, the first 2 years, it pulled some 160,000 tons of sulfuric acid out of the air. And they sold that acid to, most of it went over to the UK. There used to be boats pull up right in front of my house. I could see it as plain as day. And they took it, and it was battery acid is what they were using it for.
Okay.
And within 2 years, that town actually turned green again.
Wow, isn't that
now,
something?
I would like to ask you a quick question, if I may.
Okay. Yeah,
When was the last time you heard about the hole in the ozone layer?
Oh, it's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a long time. Sure.
Yeah, it's been a long time. So, I don't know. Last I heard was about 4 years ago that it was actually repairing itself.
Yeah, so, I don't know what. Yeah. No, it's an interesting point. Yeah, about how things go through cycles, especially when it comes to environmental news, right? And we're about to go into another big cycle now. I mean, it's all over the news now about wildfires and what kind of summer we're expecting to have. And believe me, climate change is going to be all over the news in the next few days, weeks, and months. It's going to be that time of year. It's going to be the time of year of, as I say, wildfires and heat waves and droughts. And in Atlantic Canada, there might be a few storms. Who knows what's going to happen? And this is going to be top of mind for people in the news business. You're right. Okay, we got to run, Dallas. Thank you for your call. We do have free phone lines available there. If you want to jump in on the conversation here, 1-833-668-2577. In fact, every single phone line available right now. We'd love to hear from you. Fit you right in. Share your opinion on Talkback on News Radio. Big topic today is climate change. The backdrop being all of this talk about wanting to fast-track nation-building projects, expedite approvals for nation-building projects, whether that's pipelines, developments of mines in the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario, maybe doing more offshore oil and gas development in Atlantic Canada. Ideas like this. What does that mean for the fight against climate change? Should we stay the course on fighting climate change? Certainly the Trudeau government, big believer in the fight against climate change, the fight of our lives. The biggest challenge humanity faces is a government that declared a climate emergency. What would you say? Very important, somewhat important, not important at all? 1-833-668-2577. To John, up next, calling from Alberta today. Hi, John.
Yes, good afternoon.
Hi, John.
Rob.
Yeah, hi, John. Good to hear from you.
Comment on climate change. It's certainly been a huge, huge topic. My comeback to people that suggested it's a man-made problem, I just say have a look at Axel Heiberg Island. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Have you, Rob?
No, I haven't. No.
Axel Heiberg Island is just near the geographic North Pole, and it's an island that has tree stumps and seedlings and wood and all kinds of things right up there. And it was a natural item and a natural warm climate at one time, and now it isn't. So I believe climate change is a natural phenomenon.
Okay. Do you think we've gone too far then as a country in dedicating resources to, quote unquote, fight climate change?
No, I don't think so. I think we should continue on the path as we can, but I don't think we should go overboard on it.
Okay. Do you think we've gone overboard on it in the past?
No, I don't think so. I think we still have a lot to develop, and I'm certainly in favor of pipelines and especially Energy East. I think that's very, very important that we divide our resources to both coasts. It will not only help Canadians on the way by, but it'll help Canada as a whole.
Okay, John, thank you for your call today. To Janora up next. You're on the line, Janora. Hi, thanks for calling.
Hi.
Hi, Janora. What's your opinion?
Well, you know what? I have one question for everybody, and that is just what's so bad about focusing on the environment and what could potentially happen? We need to be prepared. I live down here in southern Alberta. I grew up here, raised here. And, the agricultural practices, you see the topsoil, you see the soil degradation. History proves, that we've had issues before, like say, for example, with the Dust Bowl. Preserving and just being prepared and being conscious about what could potentially happen. I think there's a really negative view on that, and I think that maybe the government has gone about it the wrong way. Like, for example, with the carbon tax, I think that if that was presented in a different way and if there was more, grants or bonuses or whatever for people that actually were trying to be more sustainable, I think that would have been more of a positive insight on it.
Okay. So, for example, in your province, you have a very outspoken premier who has said you have to get rid of the oil and gas emissions cap. You have to promote pipeline development. You've got to get rid of this bill, the No Pipelines bill. You've got to get rid of that West Coast tanker ban, Bill C-48, clean fuel regulations, electric vehicle sales mandate. All of these, they have to go. They have to be shelved because we've got to get these projects in the ground. It's for the economic good of the country. What would you say to that?
I think that people just need to look at being more innovative. There definitely needs to be caps, and big corporate businesses need to be held responsible. Because let's be honest here, even if there is a cap, do you think that their numbers are absolutely accurate? Probably not. So there definitely has to be some sort of regulation. There definitely needs to be some sort of monitoring when it comes to that. I actually work in renewables. So we track all of that stuff. We have our environmental, social governance, all of that stuff. And it is monitored and reported, so what's so wrong with having eyes on that? And I think it should have to be government or third party that monitors that, because if there's no regulation, then people are just going to be out there, not paying attention to what could potentially happen.
Okay. Thank you, Janora, for your call from Southern Alberta today. I'm Rob Snow. Join the discussion on Talkback, the environment, the economy, nation-building projects, the fight against climate change. We're kicking it all around today and lots of time to fit you in hour number 2 here on News Radio.
2577. It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
With so much talk about fast-tracking nation-building projects, for example, First Minister's meeting happening today in Saskatoon, and that's the topic. Projects that are in the national interest. How important is it for you that Canada still be a world leader in the fight against climate change? Very important, somewhat important, not important at all. 1-833-668-2577. Tom is in Cambridge today. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
Hi, Tom. I'm good, Tom. What's your opinion?
My main concern is that right now we have to put a lot of priorities in fighting the fires. Well, you know where I stand on climate change and the dirty oil, but this is our priority. The more we burn, the more or less oxygen we have. And it's been happening for the last 3-4 years. So whether you agree that's because all these, they're all man-made, some of it aren't, but this is what we have to concentrate. Like, forget about buying $40 billion worth of planes that we can't fly anywhere. If it comes to the war with the planes, then it's too late. And I think this is what we should concentrate. Look, the smoke has been reaching Chicago. Mm-hmm. And we were lucky in Ontario that the fires aren't that much, but once they come here, how are you going to protect the people? So,
okay, you would like more resources to go into fighting wildfires. Okay,
Europe is never going to buy the dirty oil. They're working on hybrid.
Well, they've had various leaders come here. Maybe they don't want to buy Canadian oil. I don't know, but they will certainly want to buy liquefied natural gas from Canada because several leaders from European countries have been here saying they would like to buy it. And we had a previous government that
European
didn't want to sell it to them.
Is buying more stuff from Russia, dollars worth, than what they're sending money to Ukraine. So it's with our oil, it's a double whammy pollution.
Again, I come back to this. Not just oil. There's the natural gas, and the Chancellor of Germany was here a couple of years ago.
Make a deal with China, buy the soybeans, buy the oil organic, buy our beef, buy more, and this will help the West.
Okay, got to go. Thank you. Thank you. Let's fit in Ken here before we have to stop for the news. Ken, you're up next. Hi, Ken.
Hey, Rob.
Hi, Ken.
I listened to this and I'm thinking to myself, for all the people that are phoning in and saying that, we've got to bite the bullet and kind of put our resources and leave our resources in the ground. I think, really until we can convince places like Russia, Saudi Arabia, the USA now, to leave their oil in the ground, we're sort of just peeing in the wind. It makes no sense that we would watch other countries capitalize and exploit their resources when we contribute something like 3% of all of the CO2, and maybe less than that when you consider the impact that our boreal forests have in kind of sucking a lot of that CO2 back out of the air. We're a country that actually is doing far more climate-wise than most countries are, and at the same time trying to leave our resources in the ground, which doesn't make much sense at all. And with respect to, wildfires, we ought to look at forest management practices as a contributing factor to that. So,
okay, fair enough.
The young lady. I lived in Lethbridge too. The young lady that was a couple of callers back. Lethbridge is a semi-arid climate. Believe it or not, it's almost desert-like in some respects. Black widow spiders, rattlesnakes.
Okay, we're out of time.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
With so much discussion about fast-tracking nation-building projects, we've been asking on Talkback today how important it is for you that Canada remain a world leader in the fight against climate change, which you say it's very important, somewhat important, not important at all. This new government in Ottawa is under a lot of pressure to reverse course on a number of things that were put in place by the previous government in the name of fighting climate change. Policies like the oil and gas emissions cap and Bill C-69, what became known as the No Pipelines Bill, and Bill C-48, what became known as the West Coast tanker ban. Things like clean fuel regulations, clean electricity regulations, zero emissions vehicle mandate. Of course, there's been movement already on carbon taxes. We had a consumer carbon tax. That's pretty much gone. There is still a carbon tax on industrial emitters. Stay tuned on that one. We'll see what happens with the carbon pricing taxing system for industrial emitters with Mark Carney, both during the Liberal leadership race and during the federal election campaign, saying big polluters have to pay their fair share and that the carbon taxing system for industrial emitters, well, maybe that will get more expensive. Where are you on this fight against climate change with a backdrop of fast-tracking nation-building projects, whether that's new mining development, oil and gas development, offshore oil and gas development, roads to the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario? Let's go to Dan, is up next in Calgary. Hello, Dan. Thanks for waiting. What's your opinion?
Hey there, how you doing?
Good, Dan. Thank you.
That's good. So I've listened to all these different opinions, and I guess my opinion is it's kind of falls on some government failure. I know a lot of different people who work in the forest industry, and we're in agriculture ourselves, and I just kind of watch, and listen to these friends talk about how, it's hard to get permits for lumber, like for logging and stuff. And it comes down to fuel. Like over 60% of the fires in Alberta were, naturally caused by lightning stuff, but there's too much fuel on the ground, right? And so, your forest management, that's a big part of it. And you look at Jasper and what was you've talked about it, I think it was last week there with Gabot and not dealing with the deadfall from the beetle infestation there at Jasper, and you look at the horrific situation that happened there, and it's not the cut blocks that burn, it's the old growth. It's and I have a little sawmill that I play around with at home, and I have big spruce trees that are like 30-inch in diameter, and when I cut them down, 90% of them are dead rot in the middle. And I feel bad knocking big trees like that down, but at the same time, I have probably 10 or 12 of them laying there that are going to waste, and they're fuel. And, you can't pasture around them with cattle or any type of livestock because they're in the way. It takes a lot of work to get rid of them. And they just sit there and decay over the years and get drier and drier, and they just become a danger, and so, when you look at climate, so-called climate change, and you look at, my great-grandfather, my grandfather went through the dirty 30s as farmers. We still haven't reached that threshold of temperature or longevity in temperature in this country since then. And, I'm 50 years old, and I've seen a lot of weather in my life, and I've seen snow taller than me, and I've seen winters where we barely have any snow, and I just really believe in cycles. And, unfortunately, we're going through a little bit of hotter cycle right now, and it's unfortunate the way it is, but we have to manage it. And that comes down to managing our forests and putting the money there, allowing people to do the proper forest management and replanting. And I mean, the oil sands, for example, they've planted millions and millions of trees, forest industry. Millions of trees they've planted.
Oh, yes.
Greenpeace,
yes.
Greenpeace hasn't planted a single tree.
Okay.
And, and so I look at this stuff and I go, it's kind of hypocritical of the green community coming out and going, oh, everyone should, their industry should be impacted and their lives should be impacted. And yet you look at some of these people like Greenpeace and they've never done anything. They've stood there with plastic signs in plastic clothing, drove there in their cars, use markers to write on their signs, and everything's oil-based, right? And it gets, as an Albertan, it gets a little frustrating getting kicked in the teeth. You know, you drive up Highway 22 from Calgary all the way up to Grand Prairie, and you go through some of these towns that were oil-based, and there's devastation in the fact that buildings after buildings after buildings that used to be thriving businesses are no longer there. They're just empty buildings. And it's kind of sad to see, you know, when Carney and different politicians are talking about being a superpower, we should be a superpower. But all this money needs to be focused in the right areas. And that seems to be, you know, when trillions of dollars are leaving our country to go to other countries, we should be looking after ourselves first.
Okay.
And,
all right.
That's how I feel.
I've got you, Dan. You would like more practical solutions, starting with things like forest management, for example. It's not that it's not that you're not pro-environment. You just think maybe it's gone a bit too far with some of the environmental policies, and it's held back economic growth. Appreciate that opinion, sir. Very popular opinion today. 1-833-668-2577. 1, 2, 3 lines available there. One of them could be yours. We're talking about climate change as the leaders of this country gather in Saskatoon, and they talk about fast tracking these nation building projects. Just where does climate change fit into that? 1-833-668-2577. This is Talkback. Sharon is up next. Hi, Sharon. You're on the air. What's your opinion, Sharon?
Hello?
Hi, Sharon. You're on the air. Go ahead, Sharon. What's your opinion?
Hi.
Hi.
I can hardly hear you, but I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
I agree with the previous caller in a lot of things, but I do think that if we were to spend more time on utilizing our Canadian information, as in talking to our environmentalists, talking to the people who work in the areas that you want to make changes, those are the people that are going to tell us how to go forward, instead of just signing on to ideas that are brought out by other countries. Canada is a individual country, and that's the one lesson I think we took from Trump this year, is that we are individual and we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to stop just following the party line, and we need to really focus on what's good for Canada. There's a lot of great ideas out there in other countries. A lot of countries are very environmental and doing great things that Canada could be doing, and we're not doing it. Greenhouses is a really good example. We could be growing a lot of our food in Medicine Hat. They've been growing vegetables year-round for 40 years and selling it. And we don't have enough greenhouses. And that's just one instance.
Isn't that really interesting? So when you hear things like, well, we have to get rid of the no pipelines bill, and we have to have more tanker traffic on the West Coast, and we have to abandon things like electricity regulations and clean fuel regulate. What do you think when you hear things? Do you view that as a step back?
No, I don't. I really think is, no, I don't. I think that everything that is in place now should be looked at seriously, should be talked with Canadians and to find out if it's working for us. If it doesn't work for us, we don't need to do it. We don't need to follow other people. We need to do what we can do by ourselves. We have enough people in this country that are educated and can tell us what is the best foot forward. And it might be pipelines, and it might be tankers, and it might be offshore drilling. It's just whatever's the best thing and the best way to do it, because it's not like the old days where you were really hurting the environment when you were doing things. There's a lot of good ways to do stuff now and still be environmentally friendly.
All right, Sharon, thank you for your call. Good to hear from you. We'll be right back with more of your calls on Talkback, Climate Change in Focus on News Radio. Talking about fighting climate change today, how important it is for you that Canada be a world leader in the fight against climate change. Just given all of this talk about fast tracking so-called nation building projects, whether that's a pipeline or a new mine or offshore oil and gas development in Atlantic Canada. Lots of talk about this. Big First Ministers meeting happening in Saskatoon. All the premiers are there. They're pitching their ideas to Prime Minister Mark Carney. There is some worry in certain circles that this could mean a backslide in the fight against climate change. So this is why we want your opinion today. To Rick in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Rick. You're up next.
Hey, Rob. Good afternoon.
Yeah. Hi, Rick. What's your opinion?
So first of all, I'd like to thank you and thanks to the radio station, like where I learned great English and presentation skills to help me find a job. Okay. I'm a 30 years old, first generation Chinese immigrant. And currently I'm making like a $50,000 a year in Alberta, which is okay for myself. So my opinion on the climate change issue, I have to be honest that I don't think it's important at all.
Why would you say that?
For my income and people around me, a lot of them are like hard to find a job. They're having programs to make a living, like to put food on the table. For people like us, we think if we vote for like conservative Danielle Smith or Pierre Poilievre, we think we have a larger chance of finding a job to make a living. So we don't really care about the labor policies, whether or not they're going to make a change on the environment. And the second point is my experience, like 10 years ago, I think the environmentalists and like protect environment, this kind of thing is okay. It's very balanced. But now these days, they're quite radical. Also, the recent Liberal government's policy, they collect, for example, carbon tax. They simply increase the cost of living, making more people struggle. But I don't see where the money go. I think most of them got wasted. So I don't think any of them go to the real innovation. So I would quote, like 2,000 years ago, a Chinese ancient wise said that in order to teaching people about being honest, honor, and integrity, you first need to give them enough food and clothes so they can think about being a good person. That's why I think it's not important.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. There's climate anxiety and then there's economic anxiety. Thank you so much, Rick, for your call today. Thank you for all of your calls. This is one of the things that we were saying. If you sat down and you said, what's important for Canada right now? Where would climate change fit in? Would it be near the top of a list? Would it be closer to the bottom of a list? Would it be left off a list altogether? In a time when, to Rick's point, there are so many Canadians concerned about things like the cost of living, paying for the basics, living paycheck to paycheck, being nervous about having to renew a mortgage. A lot of economic anxiety right now. Maybe that is trumping, to a certain extent, climate anxiety. We'll see what comes of it all. It'll be very interesting to see. Be back tomorrow. New topics and more calls. Talk back on News Radio.